The prairie stretched silent and gray beneath the dying light of a winter Sunday. Wind carried the smell of dry grass and wood smoke, and every sound seemed sharper in the cold. Daniel Mercer, a cowboy who had never asked for company and rarely gave it, rode slowly toward a cabin slouched at the edge of the valley. His horse's hooves struck the frozen ground with hollow certainty. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to care. But a man couldn't ignore the stories that drifted through town about an old woman left sick and alone, living too far from anyone to receive help. Daniel had spent most of his life convinced the world repaid kindness with cruelty. He had seen it on the cattle trails, in mining camps, in the faces of men who drew guns before words. Yet something about the whispers unsettled him. Maybe it was the way folks spoke of her, as if the woman were already halfway buried. Maybe it was the memory of his own mother's pale face on a winter much like this one, when no doctor would ride out to their ranch because the snow was too deep. Whatever it was, it pulled him toward that lonely cabin like a hand on his shoulder. When he reached the clearing, he dismounted and tied his horse to a post nearly swallowed by weeds. The cabin leaned forward as if too weary to keep standing. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney. Daniel knocked once, and when no answer came, he pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with sickness-damp wood, cold ashes, and the faint copper tang of fever sweat. On a narrow bed lay the woman, her hair streaked with white, spilled across a pillow so thin it might as well have been a rag. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes opened when she heard him. There was no fear in them, only confusion, as though she were not sure if he was real. "Name's Daniel," he said softly, removing his hat. "Heard you were needing help." She tried to speak, but coughed instead. He found a cup, filled it with a little water left in a jug, and held it to her lips. She drank with trembling hands, then whispered, "Why?" The question cut deeper than he expected. Why indeed? He could have ridden past. He could have left her to the silence. But he simply answered, "Because someone should." He stoked the fire until it breathed again, searched the shelves for food, and found little more than stale bread. He cooked it anyway, coaxing her to eat, watching the color return faintly to her cheeks. Night fell heavy, wrapping the cabin in shadows. Daniel sat by her side, listening to her fevered murmurs. She spoke of names he didn't know, of sons who never came home, of debts never paid. Outside, the wind howled like a warning. But inside, for the first time in years, Daniel felt something he had forgotten. The quiet strength of simply being needed. He stayed through the night. By morning, frost clung to the windows, and Daniel's breath clouded the air. The woman's fever had broken, leaving her exhausted but alive. He gathered more wood, patched a hole in the roof with canvas from his saddlebag, and tended the fire again. She tried to protest, but her words were weak. "You don't owe me this," she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "Don't matter what I owe. Sometimes a man just has to stand where others won't." When she finally slept, Daniel stepped outside. The sun had risen pale and thin, and snowflakes drifted from a sky the color of iron. He was fastening his saddle when he noticed movement on the ridge. At first, he thought it was the wind stirring branches. But then he saw them clearly, riders, dozens of them, their horses dark against the snow. The sight froze him. Native warriors lined along the ridge like ghosts from another age. He had known this land was theirs long before ranchers claimed it, long before fences divided prairie from prairie. He had also known the uneasy silence between settlers and tribes, a silence that could turn to violence with the wrong word. His first thought was that they had come for him, a lone cowboy, trespassing where he shouldn't. But as the riders descended in measured silence, he realized their eyes weren't fixed on him at all. They were watching the cabin. The leader dismounted first. A man broad-shouldered and stern, his face lined with years and storms. His gaze cut through Daniel like a blade. Yet when he spoke, his voice carried not threat, but something heavier respect. "You cared for her." Daniel's throat went dry. He nodded once. "She was alone. No one else came." The leader looked toward the cabin. and for a long moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then he said, "She is mother to us all, keeper of stories. Without her, our children would not know who they are." Daniel blinked. He had not known. To him, she had been only a sick old woman on the edge of death. But to them, she was a living archive, a voice of memory that bound their people together. "You gave her back to us," the leader said, "and so we will give back to you." Before Daniel could respond, the signal was given. Riders moved like shadows into the valley, leading more than horses. They carried tools, ropes, timber. In silence, with precision born of unity, they descended upon his ranch. Daniel followed, stunned. When he reached his land, he saw them spreading like an army not of war but of restoration. Posts were reset. Fences stood straighter than they had in years. Holes in the roof were filled. Water troughs were repaired, the barn door rehung. Even his corral, broken for months, was rebuilt stronger than before. Daniel stood in the snow, watching his land transform beneath the hands of men who owed him nothing. His throat ached, though he didn't know if it was from gratitude or shame. He had done so little, only sat with a woman in her sickness. Yet they treated it as if he had saved the world. The leader approached him again, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Kindness is a stone," he said. "It falls, and the ripples carry farther than you see." Daniel could not answer. His heart was too heavy with the truth of it. By dusk, the work was finished. The ranch stood stronger than it ever had. The warriors gathered quietly, their faces solemn in the fading light. Daniel expected them to leave without ceremony, but the leader spoke once more. "You walk between worlds," he said. "Yours and ours. Few men do so with honor." Daniel lowered his eyes. "I ain't no hero." The leader studied him, then nodded. "No, you are simply a man who chose not to turn away. That is enough." When the riders departed, Daniel stood alone in the silence. His land was whole again, but his heart carried a weight he had never known. All his life, he had believed kindness was wasted, that it made a man weak. Yet now he saw it for what it was, a force that moved armies, that rebuilt what hatred had broken, that crossed the chasm between strangers. The woman survived the winter. Daniel visited often, bringing food, chopping wood, sitting quietly as she told stories he could not always understand. But he listened, and in listening, he found pieces of himself he thought long buried. Months later, when travelers spoke of the cowboy whose single act of mercy had rallied 300 warriors, Daniel only shook his head. He did not see glory in it. He saw only the truth, that in a land scarred by fences and blood, one choice could change everything. And in the stillness of many nights, when the fire burned low and the wind whispered through the valley, Daniel Mercer would remember the old woman's fragile hand in his, and the words she had spoken through fevered lips. Why? His answer had not changed. Because someone should.